Story 1. I've always read stories on here and thought some of them were too wild to be true. But after what happened to me, I'll never doubt them again. This is the story of how I ran into one of the most entitled people I've ever met actually, a Karen and her sidekick Ken. And to top it off, two very sweet women who saved the day. So, I own a company in financial services and insurance. My job mostly involves meeting with business owners. A lot of my meetings happen in my office, but for my top clients, I sometimes meet them at their businesses. One of my clients, Eddie, owns a really popular donut shop. I'm talking lines around the building popular. I stopped by his shop last Wednesday near the end of the morning rush to go over some paperwork with him. Since it was still a bit busy, I set up my laptop and papers to the side of his register while he finished helping the last few customers. I wasn't blocking the counter or anywhere near the donuts. It was just a quiet spot for me to wait. Now, just for context, I'm a big guy. I'm 450 pounds, and trust me, I've heard it all. I don't let the stares or the rude comments get to me. Eddie was finishing up with a customer when he said he'd be right back and went to the back to grab more trays of donuts. That's when the entitled duo, Karen and Ken, walked up. I didn't think much of it until I heard the infamous throat-clearing sound. Karen, I ignored it at first because, honestly, I had no reason to think they were trying to get my attention. But after a second, Karen let out another, louder before I finally looked up at them. Before I could even say anything, Karen blurted out, "How about you get up and help us out? We just need half a dozen glazed," and the guy disappeared. I replied, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I don't work here." Eddie went to the back to grab more trays. "He'll be back in a minute." Karen wasn't having it. She laughed, rolled her eyes, and gave Ken a look like, "Can you believe this guy?" Ken immediately stepped up, clearly ready to make this a bigger issue. "Ken, look, buddy, we just need 6 donuts. It'll take you 30 seconds. Put them in a box, ring us up, and you can go back to lounging on your stool." I couldn't help but chuckle at this.
Well,
"Buddy, like I said, I don't work here, so I have no idea how to help you. I'm just waiting for Eddie." Karen, now standing behind Ken and trying to look intimidating, piped up again. "Karen, who's your boss? Is it that guy who went to get more donuts, or do you have another manager?" I tried again. "Ma'am, I own my own company. I'm here for a meeting with Eddie, the owner. He's not my boss, and like I said, I don't work here." Just then, Eddie returned with the trays of donuts. He slid them into the display and turned to Karen and Ken. "Eddie, can I help you?" Karen, leaning over the counter with attitude, said, "Yeah, you can stop hiring lazy fat people who don't want to help your customers. What do you pay him in crullers?" Eddie looked confused, so I stepped in. "Me. This lady thinks I work here because I'm sitting behind the counter. I tried explaining I don't, but apparently I'm too fat and lazy not to work here." Eddie turned to Karen and Ken and asked, "Were you rude to him?" Before they could say anything, the two women who were in line behind them, who I'll call Barbie 1 and Barbie 2, spoke up. Barbie 1, "They've been incredibly rude this whole time. He tried to tell them he doesn't work here, and they just wouldn't listen." Barbie 2, "Yeah, they were awful. No one deserves to be treated like that." Hearing that, Eddie didn't hesitate. He turned to Karen and Ken and said, "You both need to leave and don't come back." Karen looked shocked, but Ken wasn't done yet. As they stormed toward the door, Ken turned and yelled, "Thanks for nothing, you fat jerk. Hope you have a heart attack before you turn 50. By the way, I'm 53. They left without another word, and I sat there, a little stunned but mostly amused. I couldn't believe that someone could be so entitled and rude over donuts. And why do people like that never believe it when you say you don't work there? Anyway, after it was all over, I realized I missed my chance for some good comebacks. But next time, I'll be ready. Story 2. This incident took place a couple of weeks ago, just before Mother's Day, and it's still fresh in my mind. I'll try to keep it clear, though it's a bit long. To give some background, My mom is the eldest of her siblings at 56 years old. She has 4 siblings: Uncle Frank 55, Aunt Melissa 53, Aunt Laura 48, and Aunt Caroline 39. In 2004, Uncle Frank and Aunt Laura moved into my grandma's house after she moved out to live with her husband. By the end of that year, Uncle Frank left, but he left behind some unpaid utility bills. To deal with it, they divided the house in half. When my mom left my dad, we moved into our half of the house. Mom cleaned everything and made a payment plan to pay off the debts that Uncle Frank and Aunt Laura had left behind. A year later, Grandma moved back into the house. Over the years, my mom, her husband, and eventually me once I started working, took care of the house. We paid for renovations, improvements, and general maintenance, including rebuilding it after a disaster hit in 2017. For years, I kept telling my mom to talk to Grandma about sorting out the house deed. We had been pouring time and money into the place, and I didn't trust Uncle Frank and Aunt Laura. They've always taken advantage of Grandma and Mom, and I knew they'd probably try to sell the house as soon as Grandma passed. If Grandma didn't want to settle it, I told Mom it was better to know now, so we could put a down payment on another house, one that Mom could call her own. Finally, after years of dealing with the aftermath of the 2017 disaster, we saved up enough money. Grandma was happy with the offer we made her to transfer the deed while keeping everything as it was. We'd continue to pay the bills, buy her groceries, cover her medications, and so on. Grandma informed her children about our plan, and Aunt Melissa and Aunt Caroline had no problem with it. They both had their own homes and were happy that Mom was taking care of the house and Grandma. But Aunt Laura, she was furious. She started calling everyone in the family, crying and accusing Mom of tricking Grandma into giving her the house and forcing her out. Now, you need to understand Aunt Laura is a difficult person. She's had a revolving door of men coming into the house, bringing them around her kids. She even spent a couple of years in jail for grand larceny, and somehow blamed the fallout on Grandma and us, claiming we didn't take care of her things while she was locked up. Aunt Laura's always been abusive, physically and verbally, toward her kids and her partners. I'll never forget when she called her 6-year-old son every name under the sun at 2 a.m. just because he woke up and found her smoking in the backyard. Grandma had finally had enough. Aunt Laura had been dumping her young child on Grandma in the early hours of the morning, and Grandma, who is 73 and has health issues, was exhausted. So, she had a talk with Aunt Laura, telling her that after 20 years of living rent-free in her house, it was time to move on and get a job. That's when Aunt Laura lost it, claiming that Mom had stolen the house and manipulated Grandma. Then, out of nowhere, she announced that her 23-year-old son had asked her to move in with him and help take care of his pregnant wife. I feel sorry for that poor girl. Aunt Laura grabbed some of her things but left behind a lot of broken furniture and boxes. We began cleaning the mess she left behind, and let me tell you, it was bad. The floors, walls, and lighting fixtures were damaged and filthy. There were cockroaches, mice, and even buckets of waste left in the bedrooms. It took us a couple of weeks to clean, repaint, and fix everything. Then came the latest drama. On the Saturday before Mother's Day, Aunt Melissa, Aunt Laura, and Aunt Caroline came over to visit Grandma. Aunt Laura started making comments about how nice and clean the place looked. She kept hinting until she finally came out and said, "Half of what you have should be enough for my share, or I can just move back in." Grandma, shocked, asked what she meant by her share. Aunt Laura said she was entitled to a portion of the house because she had lived there for so long, and it was part of her inheritance. This upset Grandma, and my other aunts quickly stepped in to take Aunt Laura away so she wouldn't stress Grandma out further. But Aunt Laura stormed out in a huff, calling everyone again, even my dad, crying and claiming Mom and Grandma were making her homeless. She even hinted at staying with him, but thankfully that didn't go anywhere. Since then, Grandma has promised Aunt Laura a few $1,000s. But with a catch, Aunt Laura has to provide quotes and proof that she'll use it for housing or starting a business. Grandma doesn't trust her with money, and neither do we. Since Aunt Laura left, the house has been peaceful, and our financial burden has lightened considerably. Here's hoping that's the last we'll hear of her for a while. Story 3. I was reminded of this incredibly irrational woman a few hours ago while reading about a person who used German to communicate with a similarly unreasonable individual. This event happened approximately 15 years ago, but many details remain vivid in my memory. It's not because of how traumatic it was, but mostly due to the fact that I had to see it through to its conclusion. It took considerable self-control and discipline to maintain the charade, but the end result still amuses me to this day. I will admit this was not one of my finer moments, but I still view it as a learning experience for everyone involved. I am fairly proficient in sign language, having learned it while teaching a summer school and computer camp for deaf and blind children. I took a course before the class to learn the basics beyond the standard alphabet. By the end of the summer, I had become very adept at signing and understanding entire conversations, allowing me to communicate effectively with my students. Personally, I believe I learned far more from them than they learned from me, but that's a story for another time. Perhaps I'll write about it someday. However, this is not an uplifting tale. It's about an irrational and entitled individual whose behavior ultimately led to her arrest. It all transpired at a K-Mart where I was searching for a specific item, the nature of which escapes me now and is irrelevant to the story. As I was replacing some items on the shelf that I had moved, I heard someone clear their throat. I ignored it, recalling that I wasn't in the mood to interact with people that day. The sound was repeated, only louder and more insistent. Irrational woman, ahem. I continued to ignore her. Irrational woman, excuse me. I still didn't respond. I could hear her foot tapping, so having completed my task, I started to move away. At this point, she grabbed my arm and forcefully turned me to face her. Irrational woman, excuse me, I'm talking to you. Me, with a startled expression, I let out a quick yelp and signed, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Irrational woman, what are you doing? I'm trying to talk to you. Do you know how rude you are? Me, signing, I'm sorry, I am deaf and did not hear you. But you have no right to grab me. Please leave me alone. Irrational woman, what are you doing? Stop waving your hands around. Are you making threatening gestures to intimidate me? Stop it right now. At this point, her yelling had drawn the attention of several customers as well as the store manager. Nice person, I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't think he can hear you. He's trying to use sign language. Store manager, ma'am, could you please come over here and leave him alone? Irrational woman, no, he's making threatening gestures to try to intimidate me. Call the police. He's dangerous. I want law enforcement here right now. She grabbed my arm and refused to let go. I must say, this woman had an impressively strong grip. Even my mother, who was a farm girl, didn't have a grip like this woman. She held on so tightly that her fingernails actually dug into my arm, leaving considerable bruises. She continued to demand police intervention while the customers and manager tried to convince her to release me. This continued for several minutes, with me attempting to pull away, her screaming, and other customers trying to separate us. I can only assume someone called the authorities. I'm unsure how long it took, but it felt like an eternity. When you have an irrational person causing you physical harm, time seems to pass more slowly. Eventually, 3 officers arrived, much to my relief. Police officer, let him go, stop screaming, and calm down. Irrational woman, I want him arrested. He was making threatening gestures and intimidating me. He was threatening me. Me, moving away from the area as quickly as possible, with the manager standing between me and the irrational woman. A couple of minutes passed. They had to restrain her before she began to communicate coherently. When things started to settle, one of the officers approached me and asked what had transpired. I should have come clean at this moment, but I couldn't abandon the pretense. I had committed to the deaf persona, and if nothing else, I'm not a quitter. I began signing to the officer, who then realized I was supposedly deaf. He produced his notepad and pen, then gestured for me to write down what had happened. Me, writing I was shopping when this lady grabbed my arm and spun me around. I tried to tell her I can't hear. She then grabbed me harder and started screaming. Everyone was trying to help, but she wouldn't let go. I just want to go home. She's unstable. She really hurt my arm. I showed him my arm, at which point the officer noticed the marks and the bruising that was beginning to appear. He then walked me over to the irrational woman. Police officer, hey, do you see this? Do you see how badly you hurt him? He has no idea why you were grabbing him. He can't hear, he's deaf. He was using sign language to communicate with you. What kind of person are you? The look on her face was entirely worth the pain and suffering. She then started babbling incoherently. Irrational woman. Well, I didn't know. How am I supposed to understand sign language? All he had to do was talk to me. It's not my fault. They should have people to help them. They escorted her to the patrol car and closed the door. They took my statement and several other statements from the other people in the store manager, and requested video footage if available. I was told I could head home. I got in my car and started laughing as I drove away, knowing I had behaved poorly and likely caused significant problems for someone. Aftermath. She was charged with assault of a disabled person and creating a public disturbance. Based on the statements, video footage, and pictures of my bruised arm, her lawyers negotiated a plea deal. She received no jail time, but was fined $600 and ordered to complete 450 hours of community service. I was notified about the plea deal by the court. In my state, if a disabled person is attacked, they must be informed and given the option to comment on whether the deal is acceptable. This information is used to help the judge make a more informed decision. As I didn't want to risk appearing in court, I signed the paper and returned it. I recognize that this entire situation reflects poorly on me, and at the time, being in my early 20s, I didn't give it much thought. My intention was to teach her a lesson about how to treat people. In hindsight, I understand how inconsiderate I was. However, I can't help but wonder what might have happened if it had been one of my students or another deaf person she had attacked. That's ultimately what mattered to me at the time. Story 4. I worked at a big box electronics store and had a good reputation as a model employee. When I transferred to a new store in a different town to attend university, I came with glowing recommendations from my previous managers. At my old store, the dress code was followed pretty loosely with no real issues. But this new store, under fresh management, was a completely different story. The new management was obsessed with enforcing every little rule. On my very first day, they made all the staff line up and pull up our pant legs to check if we were wearing black socks, even though our socks weren't even visible under our dress pants. If you didn't meet the dress code, you'd be written up and sent home for failing to uphold professionalism and breaking your terms of employment. During this sock check, which followed a cringe-worthy 2-minute dance and chant they made us do, I was publicly reprimanded. Apparently, my suede high-top sneakers had a small white patch of fabric and a thin white strip on the sole, even though it was barely noticeable under my dress pants. I was given a lecture about maintaining a professional appearance at my minimum wage job and was strongly encouraged to get shiny black shoes or face termination. I thanked my manager for his feedback and promised that as soon as I got my first paycheck, I'd buy a pair of shoes that matched his description. That bought me 2 weeks of begrudging acceptance and many disapproving looks during sock checks. After the 2 weeks, I started searching through second-hand stores for the perfect pair of shoes, and as if gifted by the universe itself, I found them. They were hideous, shiny, black, fake leather high-top sneakers with a quilted pattern. These shoes were the definition of tacky. They squeaked and made awkward noises when I walked. But the best part? They were exactly what my manager had described. They were horrible, yet technically compliant. The next day, during the sock check, I proudly lifted my pant legs. My coworkers could barely contain their laughter, and my manager? He looked like a cat that had just been dunked in water. He was speechless. Before he could recover, I pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper, the written expectations he had given me, complete with his smarmy signature at the bottom. But of course, he didn't give up. He was determined to win this ridiculous battle, even though he had lost the first round. The warnings started coming in quick succession, and honestly, I was having way too much fun. Since he couldn't get me for my shoes, he complained that my uniform shirt was too short and gave me a larger size. The new shirt was still just as short, but large enough to fit two of me inside it. Then he said my dress pants were too tight, even though they fit perfectly fine. So, I decided to switch things up and wear a snug, handbook-approved pencil skirt instead. He needed my phone to be out of sight, but accessible. No problem, I got a clip-on belt pouch. He wanted my shirt tucked in? Sure thing. My hair pulled back? Absolutely. My final, fully handbook-compliant look was a masterpiece. I wore a high-waisted, tight pencil skirt with a black crocodile print belt, sometimes placed low on my hips just to push it a bit. My belt was accessorized with the biggest phone holster I could find. The XL shirt was tucked into my small-size self, sheer black tights, mid-calf black dress socks, and of course, my terrible, horrible musical shoes. My long hair was tied up in pigtails, just for an extra touch of ridiculousness. I was truly a sight to behold. Whenever I knew my manager was on shift, I sometimes showed up in my old, non-compliant uniform, just to head straight to the bathroom to change into my new masterpiece. It was all perfectly within the rules, and it drove him nuts. Story 5. Dear reader, I had an eventful 21-year career in the United States Army, which somehow concluded with an honorable discharge. 21 years and 14 combat deployments gave me a lifetime of stories. Most of these memories are humorous and worth keeping, like the time I borrowed someone's truck or when I relocated an artillery display into my barracks. But some memories are like leftover ammo after a live fire exercise best left forgotten. Yet, they sometimes get unintentionally triggered. I worked at what I'll call the bad place before I attended assessment and selection. Working there was my sole reason for wanting to go to selection in the first place. The Bad Place TBP was a 3-star command and a nursing home for dying careers. It was a mix of National Guard, Army Reserve, active duty, and Department of the Army civilians, a foreign planet for a soldier like me, who had grown up in regiment and the 82nd Airborne Division. Overnight, I transitioned from being airborne infantry to the equipment tracking officer. My sole purpose became sourcing pre-deployment training equipment for National Guard and Army Reserve units. These units would request specific types of equipment, and I had to make sure they received at least 2/3 of what they asked for. Now, let me mention something about my boss at TBP. He was a Department of the Army civilian. After 10 years of service, this was the first time I had a civilian as my direct supervisor, and it wasn't great. I don't have issues with civilians, but I do have issues with bad leadership. Mike, my boss, was the embodiment of a dirty diaper, always full of crap, and always on my case. Side note. Sloppy. I feel the need to mention TBP recently moved. Reader, moved? Sloppy. Yes, Deep South one day, Midwest the next. Reader, aliens? Sloppy. Nope, base realignment and closure brack. Reader, what? Sloppy. The Army decided to close some bases and expand others. Reader, so, what does this have to do with the story? Sloppy. Well, none of the previous equipment tracking officers moved, so all continuity was lost. Reader, oh, that sounds like a mess. Sloppy, it was. Back to the story. Dear reader, I had no idea what my job entailed at first, and I quickly learned that Mike didn't either. He only understood the end result and was completely clueless about the steps leading to it. Mike was less useful than blinker fluid. But fear not, after 3 months of working from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m., I began to understand my roles and responsibilities. Thankfully, I had great counterparts at other organizations who were also fully aware of how useless Mike was. Fast forward 4 months. The section was still just me. I was one person doing the job of 4, performing 100% of the duties. If you wait until the last minute, it only takes a minute, became my motto. I developed standard operating procedures and automated systems to help me, and I even started catching errors from the department that validated equipment requests. Then came August 2011, and I had a memorable one-way conversation with a captain. He requested 3 Rhino buses for training, but I kindly explained why it wasn't feasible. Problem solved, right? Wrong. I then got a call from a lieutenant colonel, followed by a colonel, each pushing the same request. It quickly turned into a self-perpetuating cycle of chaos. Ring, ring, ring. Sloppy. The bad place. G4 Equipment Tracking Officer. This is Rank Sloppy speaking. How may I help you, sir or ma'am? Caller. This is Major General Richard Cranium from the California National Guard. Side note, the Major General is the top commander for all National Guard soldiers in California. Sloppy doesn't get calls from generals. Ever. Sloppy. How can I help you, sir? MG Richard Cranium angry. I'm calling to ask why you won't fulfill our equipment request. Isn't it your policy to provide 2/3? At this point, I was agitated. I had already explained the issue to everyone below him, and now I had an angry general on the line. 2 options were running through my mind: kindly explain again, or go full regiment sloppy. Sloppy. Sir, I've already explained to the previous commanders why I can't fulfill their request. There are only 5 Rhino buses in existence. 3 are in Iraq, and 2 are in Afghanistan. Should I forward this request to Forces Command? MG Richard Cranium. Oh, no, that won't be necessary. Rank Sloppy. Sloppy, are you sure? I can. MG Richard Cranium. No, I'll take care of it. Did you explain this to them? Sloppy. Every single one, sir. MG Richard Cranium. Disregard. I have some phone calls to make. Dear reader, I thought that was the end of it. But no, the colonel had already contacted Mike, demanding Rhino buses. Explaining things to Mike was like trying to explain what number the letter purple tastes like. Mike, did you tell a unit they can't have a piece of equipment? Sloppy. Yes, sir. Mike, why? Sloppy, because there are only 5, and they're all deployed to combat zones. Mike, well, you need to figure out how to get them. Sloppy brain laughing. Is this guy serious? Sloppy, you want me to call the Pentagon and ask them to redeploy from combat because a unit needs to train with them? Mike, it's not your job to validate equipment. It's your job to source it. Do you understand? Sloppy lip service. Roger that, sir. I followed his orders to the letter after that. When I received a ridiculous equipment request for helicopters, I didn't question it. I called every contact I had, sourced 4 helicopters from all over the country, and turned the request over to Mike for his signature. A month later, I got a call from a platoon sergeant. SFC Ricky Bobby, I'm looking at 4 helicopters. I'm told I need to sign for them. Sloppy laughing. Well, you requested them for training, didn't you? SFC Ricky Bobby. Yes, but I'm not a pilot. What am I supposed to do with 4 helicopters? Sloppy laughing. I guess you could try flying them. After that call, I didn't make it 5 feet before I was summoned to Mike's office. The G4 Colonel, Deputy G4, and G3 Colonel were all there. Mike, it seems we have an issue. Rank Sloppy. Sloppy, really? I'm not aware of any issues. Mike, why did you source 4 helicopters for a unit that didn't need them? Sloppy, did they request them? I can check the request. Mike, I have it right here. Yes, they did. G4 Colonel, did this request seem odd to you? Sloppy with a straight face. Absolutely, sir. The room went silent, shocked. G4 Colonel, then why did you source it? I retold the entire Rhino bus saga, explaining how Mike had insisted it wasn't my job to validate equipment, only to source it. Mike, do you realize you just cost the Army over $100,000 to ship equipment we didn't need to ship? G3 Colonel angry. No, Mike, you just cost the Army that money. G4 Colonel walking out. Mike, let's have a meeting in my office. And with that, I returned to my desk, unbothered. It wasn't my problem anymore. Later, The G3 Colonel sat on my desk, laughing. G3 Colonel, how did you do it? How did you find 4 helicopters? Sloppy, I called everyone. Made it my mission. G3 Colonel still laughing. Honestly? That's impressive. Sloppy, sir, I was going to get in trouble either way. So, I thought, forget Mike. G3 Colonel laughing. Yeah, forget Mike. Story 6. My college years back, when I was an overworked, cranky little jerk. I'm still a bit of a handful, but I'm less cranky and overworked now. This story happened during spring tours in my junior year. It was the time when incoming students were being shown around campus, and we engineering students were buried under year-end projects. Meanwhile, the deans were busy bragging about how awesome the school was, completely ignoring the ridiculous price tag. Anyway, my roommate and fellow engineering student, who I'll call Ben, and I were scrambling to finish our lab reports in time for submission. We were already behind because our tutoring jobs ran long, and we weren't allowed to leave before the students were done. Right in the middle of our mad dash to finish, the Dean of Engineering waltzed into the lab. Dean, stop what you're doing and clean up the lab immediately. Ben and I exchanged confused looks, glancing at the boxes of lab supplies left out by delivery. Me. We really need to get this lab report done. It's 10% of our grade. And, by the way, this isn't our mess, and it's not our job to clean it. Dean, if you don't comply, I'll tell your lab instructor to give you zeros on the assignment. It's your fault for not being more prepared. Now clean this lab. We want the tour to be memorable for the new students, and you will help make it memorable. Just as the dean left, our lab instructor walked in. He sighed when he heard what had happened. Lab instructor, sorry, guys. I'll try to push the submission deadline back by an hour for you. Ben and I both shrugged, knowing he meant well, but we also knew he had no idea how to actually change a submission deadline. I shoved Ben out of the way and took over the computer. Me, you start cleaning. I'll finish the report. It was a well-known fact that I was the best writer in the class, despite my dyslexia. Growing up with an English major mother gave me an advantage in writing long-winded essays about things I barely understood. But in this case, I actually knew the material, so I cranked out the report in about 45 minutes. With the assignment submitted, I joined Ben to help unpack the boxes. Ben, being smarter than me in the danger department, didn't let me near the box crusher. Probably for the best. As I helped, I found a box of industrial breath masks, the big particle filtering kind that make you look like Bane from Batman, and an idea popped into my head. I donned one and turned to Ben. Me, what did the dean say about making the tour memorable? Ben, stop fooling around and help. Me, I am helping. I'm also planning. He threw a box at my head. Ben, save the evil villain monologue for later. Me, we both know I'm the anti-hero. You're the villain, you even have a goatee. He stroked it thoughtfully. Ben, good point. Me, anyway, listen. I then laid out my plan in great detail. The engineering building was built into a hill, with both the first and second floors having ground-level access. We were on the first floor, where the double lab doors opened directly to a set of outer doors, about 12 feet away, leading outside. It was designed for wheeling in big lab equipment. If you walked up the hill, you could wrap around the building and enter through the south side. And we were about to use that to our advantage. Ben and I finished putting the supplies away and geared up. We put on the breath masks, lab goggles, full lab coats, heavy-duty gloves, shoe covers, and hair covers, the works. We looked like full-on scientists, completely unrecognizable. I grabbed a beaker, half-filled it with dish soap and hot water, and shook it like one of those shake-weight things. I also picked up some tongs, because, well, why not? Ben grabbed a voltmeter, taped random stuff to it, covered it in foil to make it look more scientific, and armed himself with a fire extinguisher he dipped in dish soap suds. We crouched by the lab's double doors and peeked through the crack. There was no center post, making it perfect for spying. Right on time, the dean appeared with about a dozen prospective students and their parents. They looked bored. The dean looked pompous. It was the perfect setup. "Dean, this lab is the safest in the region." That was our cue. We burst through the doors, screaming at the top of our lungs. "Me, look out, it's gonna blow." I sloshed some foam from my beaker as we sprinted through the outer doors and bolted up the hill, disappearing around the corner. I glanced back and saw some of the prospective students already running away from the building. We circled back through the south doors, ran down the stairs, and re-entered the lab. The double doors had swung shut behind us, but it didn't matter. The dean was outside, desperately trying to round up the tour. Ben and I quickly stripped off our gear, put everything back in place, rinsed out the beakers, and hung up the extinguisher. We sat down with a couple of textbooks and pretended to study. I had to remind Ben to turn his book right side up for more realism. 5 minutes later, the doors opened, and the dean stormed in with the tour. He shot us a look that could kill, but we just sat there, looking innocent. The tour was over in record time, and as they left, a couple of kids glanced at me. I winked. They started snickering. Later, the dean gave us a lecture on proper decorum and pride in the school. I interrupted him. "Me? Was the lab not clean enough? Or did we not do enough to make the tour memorable?" That got us dismissed pretty quickly. A new rule was added after that: students couldn't handle lab supplies without a faculty member present. But on the bright side, we were never asked to clean the lab again. Oh, and we got a note on the lab report.